The Navy's most advanced destroyer sat silently in the repair dock. It was due to depart for a classified mission in just 3 days, but the engine remained dead. Every engineer had given up, and then they called a name forgotten for nearly 20 years. A quiet old man living by the bay with grease-stained hands and a worn brass rod. He didn't seek fame. He wasn't after revenge. He only needed to hear the ship's heartbeat, which he once considered part of his flesh and blood. Watch the whole story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread stories of quiet decency and dignity. Ocean winds swept through the old workshop by Tracy Bay, where salt had eaten into the bricks and the wooden door creaked each time it opened. Everything seemed frozen in that small, tin-roofed shed. A scratched wooden table, a rusted metal toolbox cleaned daily, and an old radio that played the same country tune every morning like clockwork. The man who lived there was Walter Jennings. Locals called him the old dockside mechanic, the one who could bring dead engines back to life by sunset, even if no one understood how. He lived alone. No wife, no children, no former crewmates ever visited. Only the sound of machines and the sea remained his faithful companions. As a boy, Walter was the deaf kid obsessed with gears. He once dismantled his father's pocket watch to find where the ticking came from. At 10, he fixed the neighborhood's broken water pump. At 14, he sat aboard a fishing boat, closed his eyes, listened to the engine's pulse, and named the bolt that had come loose. No one taught him. No school trained him. Only the sound of engines and something bone deep served as his textbook. At 18, he joined the Navy, not out of dream or duty, but because he wanted to touch the strongest machines on Earth. And he did. As chief engineering officer aboard a destroyer, Walter helped design the early LM-2600 shaft stabilization system, a breakthrough. His shipmates called him the man who could hear steel talk. Young technicians training under him learned to fall silent when he worked, afraid to disturb that mysterious instinct you couldn't teach in class. Until that fateful day during a routine drill in the Pacific. The main engine failed, sending the ship off course. Emergency report, hasty inquiry. A conclusion was delivered with brutal speed. Chief engineer failed to conduct routine preventive maintenance. Walter had no chance to defend himself. No questions, no hearing. Just a discharge letter, handed without a word and a mechanical nod from command. He returned to Tracy, threw away all his awards and patents, bought back an old boathouse by the bay, and began earning a living by fixing fishing boat engines for local men. Each day, he still rose before dawn, wiped down his toolbox, poured himself coffee, turned on the radio. He started his day like an ordinary working man. But no one knew. He kept a faded photograph in the last drawer of his desk. In it was the first ship he ever served on, and beneath it, handwritten, "I belonged here, and I still do." Walter never spoke of the old wound, never badmouthed anyone. But when asked about the past, he'd always give the same quiet reply, "If it ever needs me again, I'll return." That night, a soft rain fell. Walter was rinsing grease-stained hands in a metal basin when the landline rang, a sound he hadn't waited for in years. He picked up. "Jennings speaking." The voice on the other end was deep and firm. "Walter, this is Royce Carter, Naval Engineering Command. The Atlantic's main engine has failed. We've called every expert, and no one can solve it." "Then I remembered you." Walter stood motionless. The yellow lamp lit the dusted window. He didn't answer right away. Just looked up at the faded photo and said calmly, "Send a car and make sure there's absolute silence when I work." The black military SUV turned down the final curve before stopping at the workshop. Walter Jennings stepped out, toolbox in hand, like it was part of his body. No one saw him off. Only the waves slapping against the rocks and the faint smell of old oil on his coat. He sat silently through the ride to the base. No questions, no small talk, just stared out the window, where the warships that once defined his life now floated as faded outlines in memory. The vehicle stopped at the gate of Westport Naval Base, one of the largest engineering centers on the Pacific coast. Inside stood hardened concrete buildings, long runways, and dry docks holding ships worth hundreds of millions. A young guard raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He leaned toward the window, frowning. "Who are you?" Walter Jennings, special authorization from the chief engineering officer. The guard glanced at the older man's faded clothes, unimpressed. Got papers? Walter pulled out a sealed envelope stamped in red. The soldier skimmed it, shrugged, and hit the gate release. Head straight to Base 7. Sounds like they're really desperate. Walter walked through the gate. Young recruits passing by turned to stare. They saw an older man with a battered toolbox, muddy boots, and a slow gait, unlike any engineer they'd ever met. One muttered, "Dear God, this is the expert they called? Probably meant to be on display at the museum." They chuckled, but Walter didn't look back. He was used to those eyes. Base 7 was part of the main workshop, right next to the dry dock where the USS Atlantic, a state-of-the-art destroyer, sat immobile. Its main engine wouldn't start. Inside, white light bathed the space. Modern consoles, dozens of monitors, vibration diagnostics humming, and a team of engineers huddled around the engine core, stuck for 3 days. Walter stepped in. No one noticed, until his steel-toed boots echoed on the concrete floor. Someone looked up. "Jennings," a surprised voice called out. Admiral Royce Carter stepped forward and gave him a firm handshake. "Thanks for coming. They didn't believe me, but if anyone still understands this ship's heart, it's you." Walter nodded, said nothing, just set his toolbox down. A gray-haired engineer approached, voice cool. "I'm Ben Stratton, chief engineer. We've tested everything. Fuel valves, ultrasonic flow checks, nothing's wrong." Walter glanced over the schematics. "You run it at max power yet?" Stratton frowned. "Impossible, too risky. Engine could blow, and you are..." Walter met his gaze. "The only one willing to hear it breathe." Stratton scoffed. A few younger techs shrugged. Someone whispered, "He's going to use that brass rod, isn't he?" Walter didn't flinch. He approached the engine and placed a hand on its casing, like feeling a living creature. "I need complete silence, no chatter, no devices, and I need it running at full capacity for 30 seconds. No one responded, no one believed. Stratton narrowed his eyes. "You expect to hear something through 12 inches of alloy steel?" Walter opened his toolbox, pulled out a slightly worn brass rod, pressed one end to the engine, the other to his ear. The air thickened. "That's not a proper measuring device," Stratton muttered. Walter didn't answer. "It doesn't measure, it listens." "Start it," Walter said. His voice wasn't loud but firm enough to stop everyone mid-motion. No one moved. Ben Stratton crossed his arms, frowning. "We don't run the engine at high power without confirming the fault. You know the safety protocol." Walter lifted his head, gaze unwavering. "That's exactly why the ship's been dead for 3 days. Because you're following protocol." Tension snapped across the room like a tight wire. A junior engineer edged toward the control panel, but Stratton raised a hand. "Running it now could cause irreversible damage. If you're wrong, I'll walk out and say nothing else." Walter spoke clearly and calmly, not as a challenge, not with fear, just the certainty of someone who had gambled with lives before, not simulations. Admiral Carter stood silent, eyes moving between them. Then he gave a slow nod. "Run it, 30 seconds." Stratton exhaled hard. "Idle for 20, then ramp up." A siren blared. Safety lights flicked from green to yellow. The engine roared like a beast waking up. Harsh vibrations filled the bay, echoing off steel walls. The floor trembled. Walter didn't flinch. The brass rod pressed to the engine housing, the other end held to his ear. His eyes closed, brow tensed, lips sealed. The entire room held its breath. Junior techs froze. Background chatter died. Only the rising pitch of the turbine remained, throbbing like a giant mechanical heart. Walter raised his right hand, signaled, "Hold power steady." 5 more seconds passed. Then suddenly he motioned, "Shut it down." The engine cut instantly. The silence followed was heavy, like something sacred had left the room. Walter lowered his hand and placed the rod back into his box, took a breath, looked up. It's not a mechanical failure. It's axial misalignment under high-frequency resonance. At 92% RPM, the shaft drifts by 1.2 millimeters. That causes out-of-phase harmonic noise. You only hear it in the last 6 seconds at peak speed. Stratton's eyes widened. No sensor picked that up. We ran 5 diagnostics. Walter pointed to his chest. This sensor's been running 40 years. Doesn't need batteries. A young engineer muttered, How could he even tell it was misaligned? Walter cut in gently. Because I've heard it scream for help, out there, in the middle of the ocean. Stratton stood frozen. His face was stiff. But this time, no scoffing, no arguing, only silence. Walter latched his toolbox shut and turned to leave. Carter caught up. Walter, stay! Help them with the fix. I've said enough. They know what to do, if they choose to believe. At least let us thank you. Walter paused, turned back, voice calm. I didn't come here for thanks. He looked through the glass toward the USS Atlantic, still silent, almost listening. I came because it was once a part of me, and I won't let it be treated the way I was. Walter walked out of the bay. His footsteps echoed, steady, slow, like the beat of an old engine still running deep inside. Behind him, the younger men said nothing. One of them quietly removed his headset and stared at the brass rod Walter had left behind. Under the cold fluorescent light, it reflected a faint glow, as if it had just completed a mission no one believed in. That afternoon, there was no sun, no rain either, just a gray light blanketing the bay, as if the sky itself couldn't decide. Walter Jennings returned to the workshop, set the toolbox on the old wooden table, washed his hands in a basin darkened by grease, sat in his usual chair, the one he leaned on after every engine job. No one was there, no greetings, no noise. Only the familiar silence, but today, it felt different. The landline rang. Walter looked up at the blinking light, then slowly picked up the receiver. Jennings speaking. The voice on the other end was soft, unsure. Mr. Jennings, this is Ben Stratton. Walter said nothing. I just wanted to let you know. Stratton drew in a deep breath, like he was untying something long stuck in his chest. We followed your instructions, laser aligned the shaft, detected a misalignment at high-speed operation, exactly what you said, 1.2 millimeters. None of the sensors picked it up. Walter stayed silent. Stratton continued, voice slower now. The engine's been stabilized. The ship will sail tomorrow as planned. Thanks to you, the mission's back on. A pause, only the faint buzz of the old phone line remained. I also wanted to say something else. His voice dipped. I was wrong about you, about things you can't measure with instruments. Maybe I forgot. Not everything comes from data. Walter leaned back in his chair. I don't need your apology, Engineer Stratton. No, I'm not saying it for you, I'm saying it for me. The next morning, just after sunrise, a military helicopter landed behind the workshop. Its blades kicked up dust and dry leaves, blurring the figure. Walter Jennings stood still, hands in coat pockets. His old toolbox lay at his feet. He brought nothing else. He didn't need to. A young officer stepped out, sunglasses, formal uniform. Mr. Jennings, Admiral Carter requests your return to the base. Walter nodded, asked nothing, picked up his box like it was just another day. At Westport, things were different. No skeptical glances, no whispers. Young sailors stood at attention as Walter passed. A few nodded, one even saluted. Walter entered the engineering command center. Admiral Carter waited with a team of officers. Walter, he said, voice calm but resolute, yesterday you saved an operation, but more importantly, you helped correct a mistake. Carter pulled out a white envelope with red trim, held it with both hands. Inside is an official letter of apology, an order voiding the old accusations, and the recognition you should have received long ago. Walter accepted it, didn't open it. This time, will you take it? Walter looked at the envelope, then tucked it into his coat, nodded slowly. Not because I need it, but because if we don't fix these things, others will keep making the same mistakes. Stratton stepped forward. His face was still firm, but something in his eyes had changed. Mr. Jennings, he said, I've studied engine mechanics for 20 years, but yesterday, I learned something I never touched in my entire career. Walter looked him in the eye. Thanks for coming back. And for the first time, Walter smiled. A small one, but real. In the distance beyond the command center windows, the USS Atlantic was preparing to depart. The sounds from the dock echoed faintly, but inside the room, there was a perfect stillness, as if every noise had stepped aside for something that needed no volume to be heard. Emotion, serenity, healing, the silent restoration of honor. Pacing, slow, cinematic, emphasis on light, space, and symbolism. Walter Jennings strolled down the hallway of the command center. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long sun strips across the floor. In his coat pocket, the red-trimmed envelope remained unopened, but now it no longer felt heavy. The base was tranquil at dawn. Young engineers were working, but some stood up straight as he passed, not by command, but out of something more profound, perhaps recognition. Before leaving, Walter stopped at the engine bay, where he once pressed brass to steel and listened to a ship breathe. Engineer Dylan, the young man who had quietly watched Walter from day one, scribbled notes on a whiteboard. He turned, slightly flustered, then set down his pen. "Mr. Jennings," Walter nodded lightly. "I studied modern engineering, but yesterday, it was the first time I saw someone listen to a machine like it had a soul." Walter didn't respond immediately. He stepped forward and touched the recalibrated engine's steel casing. "It's not a soul," he said quietly. "It's memory. Machines that have weathered storms, that once carried the lives of comrades, they remember. They ache. They fall out of sync, like a soldier who was left behind." Dylan fell silent. Walter turned, headed toward the door, and then paused. "Remember this, kid. Engineering is something you learn, but respect, that's something you keep." Outside on the base, a helicopter waited to fly him back to Tracy. But this time, Walter wasn't walking alone. Admiral Carter accompanied him to the helipad. "You know," Carter said, "when I was a young lieutenant, you were the first to teach me how to feel the vibration through the hull, not just watch the screen. I never forgot." Walter gave a faint smile. "We were all young once. What matters is having someone remind you." Before he boarded, Carter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small item. A medal inscribed with Walter's name and the words, "For listening when others measured." "No one told me to make this," Carter said. "I did it because I owe you, and because the younger ones need to see that men like you deserve respect." Walter took it and looked it over. He didn't say thank you, but his gaze softened, as if the final crack inside had finally closed. The helicopter lifted off. Dust and dry leaves swirled around the landing pad. The base receded in the distance. Through the window, Walter saw the USS Atlantic being towed from its berth, preparing to head out into the bay. The engine is now steady, the sound low and sure. No more tremble, no more hesitation. That ship and was a symbol of him, of a man once forgotten, and now quietly returning to where it had always belonged, the sea. As the helicopter climbed higher, the whole base grew smaller beneath them, but the ship stood out, cutting through the waves, leaving a long white wake on the silver-blue water. Walter kept his eyes on it, not with pride, but with peace. At the old Tracy workshop, Walter opened the door, set his toolbox on the bench, and sat in his familiar chair. In silence, he opened the red-trimmed envelope for the first time. Inside was a letter of apology, a document restoring his honor, and a handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding us that old doesn't mean useless." He folded the papers and placed them in the drawer, next to an old ship photograph. He didn't hang it, didn't frame it. He just kept it there, right where it all began. And now, where he returned. Emotion, quiet gratitude, generational handover, honoring old values. 1 month later, the destroyer USS Atlantic completed its first mission since the engine repair. No incidents, no alarms, just the steady hum of turbines, like the heartbeat of a soldier back where he belongs. In the final engineering report, a handwritten note was added. "Engine successfully calibrated, per recommendation of retired naval officer and technical advisor, Walter Jennings." It wasn't read during the flag ceremony. It wasn't aired on television. But to those who witnessed it, that sentence restored more honor than any speech could. Back in Tracy, Walter never spoke about it. He still fixed machines, still wiped down his toolbox every morning. But something had shifted. Every time the radio played an old song, he smiled slightly. It was as if something deep inside had finally been released, even if no one saw it. One afternoon, the young engineer Dylan stopped by the workshop. A small brass plaque was carefully wrapped in rough cloth in his hands. "I didn't know where to put it," he said, "but I thought you'd understand." Walter unwrapped it. Etched into the metal were the words, "Honor doesn't come from applause. It comes from doing what's right, even when no one's left to stand with you." He stared at it for a long time, then nodded. He didn't say thank you, because Dylan already understood, and that was enough. In the distance, the Atlantic pulled away from port again. The engine gave a soft growl. The sea responded. And in a quiet workshop by the bay, an older man kept listening, with everything he had left.